Thank you for joining me in this panel, which is going to take leverage on what has been talked in the previous panels and focus a bit on innovation. And looking to your backgrounds and your activities, you all work or worked in central IT state institutions, which in Europe sometimes are lagging in terms of using the newest technologies, behind sometimes even China, but behind the US. But there's always some interesting case studies, some experiences from which we can learn on how to break through, how to innovate, how to bring within a colossal institution some new ideas, some new ways of doing things. And I'd like to start with Stela, because every time I went to Moldova in the past 10 years and I started talking about innovation, digitalization, everybody said, well, Stela Mocan is already doing that. So you're coming from Romania to tell us about what can be done, but we're already doing it because we have some wonderful people and they used to be led by Stela. And now you're leading or participating in the leadership of a very interesting initiative at the World Bank. I read a white paper about it. And the Technology and Innovation Lab, as far as I've seen, has two pillars. One is focused on blockchain and one is focused on artificial intelligence. And I'm really curious to find out how that jump-started within such a big institution as the World Bank, especially since I saw that it somehow started as a volunteering, passionate initiative. And how are you using now blockchain, artificial intelligence to support your staff, but also the countries and the beneficiaries that you work with?
Good afternoon, and thank you very much for this opportunity to join the forum and share our experience. I would like to build on everything that was shared with us in the earlier sessions and make a focus on the importance of the government to be fully involved in driving digital transformation, in adopting innovation. No matter how active and innovative is the private sector, you need an upgraded government. You need a government who is, through its processes, through its people, through its practices, is fully able to embrace digital and is able to support its citizens and its business to be more digital enabled. So in terms of what we have been doing at the World Bank Group, 2 years ago we have started paying more attention to the disruptive or emerging transformative technologies and how these emerging technologies can be harnessed by our client countries, emerging markets, to speed up their development. Because what's happening now, digital is speeding up the, or if the countries are not able to embrace digital, they can become less developed faster. Yeah? So this discrepancy between developed and developing is increasing at a higher speed, I would say even at the exponential speed. And we would like to help our clients to fully embrace digital innovation, at the same time mitigating the risks. We talked about data privacy, we talked about cybersecurity, we talked about the need to upgrade the legal and policy frameworks. But before helping others, we need to help ourselves. And we realized that in the bank, we need to learn fast about what is blockchain, what is AI, what is Internet of Things. And the best thing of learning about this is by doing. So that's why we created Technology and Innovation Lab, which is anchored inside the technology department of the World Bank, but is working very closely with our staff and our clients, with private sector. We learn by running experiments how these technologies can solve problems like land administration or health supply chain, agriculture supply chain. How can we improve financial inclusion by harnessing both artificial intelligence, biometrics, and blockchain, and so on. But looking at our experience in the last 2 years, by bringing not just our colleagues in the business units, but bringing legal and policy practitioners. We didn't just learn together, but we thought about how can we speed up the engineering of legal and policy frameworks, because digital transformation is not about technology. It's about how fast we can change not just the way we do business, but how fast we can legalize the new practices and the new norms. And learning from this experience and from my previous experience, I think that governments need to put in place this kind of internal drivers. Either you call it a hub or you call it a lab, which can connect the internal bureaucracy with the external innovation and can quickly, in an agile manner, start changing things and start bringing innovation inside. And would be happy to share more insights about this.
Thank you. Yih-Jeou, I'm curious, you're now the Councillor for Cyber Policy and Digitalisation, but you used to be more of a CIO, involved deeper in steering the direction in which digitalization and e-government went in Denmark. And Denmark is today, not just in e-government, but generally in innovation, in startups, in the way digital is helping society and economy grow, is one of the leaders in Europe. From where you stand, looking back, what have been the main, the groundbreaking decisions that Denmark has taken to accelerate these things? And since we talk about open and agile governance, how did you get to work with maybe private stakeholders that, did you get them to contribute and get involved in some way, and how did you manage it legally, as Stela just said?
It's very good questions. I think a little bit of my own background, because yes, I've been basically part of the Danish IT or digital development since the early 1990s, and have also a background from 5 years in OECD, responsible for digital public digitalization. So I've also have an opportunity to look at it from a global point of view. I think you asked about what were our most decisive or transforming decisions made to push digital development in the Danish public sector. I think there are two issues. The first is we as citizens really don't care about which part of government, whether central, regional or local, actually are responsible for public service delivery. And that's also why we, since the beginning of this millennium, have worked on common public sector approaches, common public sector strategies and common public sector action plans. This was a deliberate decision because in order to put the citizens in the center of development. Another thing that we could see, we have used a lot of years since the early 1990s to work on a voluntary approach, meaning nudging, marketing of public services. But at some point, the uptake, we couldn't get it above 70%. That is also high at that time. But, and that was why in the aftermath of all the financial and economic crisis back in 2008, we needed to think out of the box. What can we do in order to ensure that we use public tax money best? What can we do in order to ensure cost savings? And being from the Ministry of Finance, there's a very simple logic behind that. Digitalization was the tool that could be used for that, making it mandatory by law, not just digital first or digital by default, as many other countries in Europe and world do it, but making it mandatory by law to use online services has been a very good way of pushing the thinking and also to engage the citizens. We didn't do that in blind. And we also had assumptions about which part of the population we need to support most. And our assumption was actually the elderly population, the disabled persons, etc. But that assumption actually was an error we discovered after a few years, and we're talking about the last strategy period of 2011 to 2015. We found out actually the largest barrier for our digitization was not our elderly. They would comply with government demand, and we had a very close cooperation with NGOs representing the elderly population. What we found out was actually it was the digital native, our young people, those are from 15 years of age up to 30. And they didn't know what government was about, didn't have knowledge, and if they accidentally read an official letter from a government authority, they didn't understand, didn't understand the clue of what was written in it. So that has nothing to do with digital or not. We know that our digital natives know how to use the technology, but the functioning and of the public sector and the broader knowledge of the public sector was a real issue. And that was also why we had to shift our communication strategy from our assumed weaker population segments, elderly, disabled persons, to our younger population segments, in order to try to engage them in other ways. And by the way, public sector use normal traditional websites. Our young generation are not on the websites, they are on social media platforms, etc. So there was also another thing that we need to take into account in our digitization approach in order to get everybody on board. Our elderly, we have, I think, if we look at the statistics, in average, we have more than 90% uptake of public sector online service usage. Our elderly population, 75 to 89 years of age, we have about 65–67% uptake. And that's also why when we had a very close discussion with our NGOs who represent our disabled person, they actually pointed out that they wanted the government to accelerate digitization because they were dependent on having digital content available in order for instance, visual disabilities. They have to have digital content in order to use in their digital devices, helping them to read things on screens, etc. So it was a complete, and we're talking about experiences from 5 or more years ago. That was a complete wake-up call for us to rethink of what we assumed was the weak segments of our population were not the weak segments of our population. We needed to refocus our attention to other parts, our young generation.
Thank you. Now, going from experiences to plans, because you're from Croatia, and most of the people here are from Romania, as far as I've checked. And I think it's really interesting to see what a fellow new member of the European Union, a fellow new challenger for the digital revolution and the challenge of digitization of government is planning to do, maybe to compare agendas and compare plans to what we are doing in Romania, what Mr. Petrescu has been talking about throughout this Romanian presidency. So what are you planning to do these days in Croatia in terms of digital? What are your maybe 3 priorities that you think will change the way government is done in Croatia?
Well, first of all, thank you for invitation, for participating in this forum. And I would just like to add a few words regarding the previous speakers. Of course, digitalization is nowadays the most important process. New technologies emerge every time, and they have become the part of our lives that we can't live on without. But one of the most important things is to have the society that is prepared for the new technologies. So you have to develop digital skills of the whole society, your entire citizens, to be ready for this technological revolution. And that is why digital skills and advanced digital skills is one of the top priorities also in Croatia, and also part of the working agenda within my office, to have our citizens to be prepared to use technologies in everyday life and in their business. So one of the projects that I could mention is e-schools. So the basic idea is to equip all schools with the modern technologies, and also to educate teachers to be able to teach the students on new and modern way, and to prepare them for the digital society. Also, we have to have in mind older citizens, older population that is often frightened to use new technologies. They don't trust them, and of course they don't have enough digital skills. But we shouldn't leave them behind, so we should also include them equally into society. Because if you have all kinds of new technologies and you're only technology focused but not human focused, that there is no use in that, and you will not achieve your goal, because technology is here for the people and because of the people. And also we see that some part of working population is also lacking about digital skills. So there are also some programs in cooperation with our Ministry of Education to advance these skills of these people. And when it comes to our presidency, of course, just early today we also had some discussions on that subject. We will follow the trends and the issues that are emerging. So 5G, Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, robotics. So these are all the fields where we do need make some progress. And when we also come to 5G and artificial intelligence, it's not only the question and issue of technology, but this is also the ethical and the legal question. And this is the area that is not clearly defined, and where we don't have clear guidelines and some, let's say, common ethical basis or that needs to be followed. So these are the areas that we will put our efforts to make some progress.
Thank you. Now, Stela, I was wondering, now going from a national CIO, as you worked in the Republic of Moldova, to work with the World Bank, did you find this kind of an experimental lab or hub approach that you're now having at the World Bank, did you find it to be applied, to be used already in some of the countries that you work with? Is there any country that's already using this kind of an experimental approach? Because I know the JRC, for example, is using it to do some experimental policy research for the European Commission. But I've been researching to see whether it's happening. I found some interesting experiences in Lithuania, where they work at the National Bank with a sandbox concept focused on fintech startups and fintech innovation. But is it happening, is this kind of experimental approach happening in Europe? Is it happening somewhere else? Who's leading in doing experiments, innovating with the way of doing things in the world today?
You mentioned the fintech. Many central banks in our client countries across the world, Asia, Europe, Africa, creating these sandboxes and running experiments on different problems related to financial inclusion, to the way the country is running its financial service delivery models. So this is happening a lot, and you see an easy transition from the experimentation, from the sandbox experimentation into piloting, which implies moving into more production, a real-life implementation of these emerging technologies. Another request we see from our clients is many governments are creating innovation labs, especially in Africa. Many governments are helping their cities to create innovation labs at the city level to run smart city initiatives. So this, we see these requests growing a lot. If you look at other countries in other parts of the world, Smart Dubai is a good example to look at the way they have been embracing emerging tech to both redesign some of their business processes and embed innovation in government service delivery. In Asia, Southeast Asia, many countries are creating the labs that are not just focused on emerging tech, but looking at how will emerging tech disrupt the way services are delivered in health, education, social space. And a lot of them are using system thinking approaches or foresighting, implying bringing multiple stakeholders around the table, trying to read the signals that we see happening right now in these regional global ecosystems, and what does all these signals mean in terms of how we are going to deliver services to not just elderly people in the future, but to the new generation, because we are trying to address the problems that we have today with service delivery for the current population, but we kind of are leaving in the background the young people, the millennials. They are already born with digital skills. Yeah, they cannot imagine going to the government websites because they're already mobile native, digital native. And how do you, as a government, plan your country development in such a way that you don't have to recreate the world for these people when they become mature and when they are entering the workforce? And how do you make sure that you bring them in, making them active citizens, and don't give them the choice of creating their own societies and communities and service delivery models. So I think you will see more and more of these labs or experimentation spaces coming up because the current way bureaucracies have been designed and running the business is just not efficient anymore. So you need a space where you can experiment fast, fail fast, not to be punished because you didn't get the results you expected, and keep learning and embed this learning in the larger systems of the government, business, and societies.
That's a good insight, and indeed I've seen that mostly is the fintech world which is moving really fast now, especially the central banks with the sandboxes. But I've been looking at some of the European regulation that is changing. For example, I think one of the potential future drivers of experimentation, of innovation, is in the PSI directive related to the reuse of public sector data, public sector information. So I'm curious, Yih-Jeou, what do you think can be a driver within Europe in terms of regulation, of common policy of the Union? Is it a PSI that can give us a framework to experiment, to use data for innovation within the public sector or in a cooperation framework with the private sector? Or is it something else that we can all do in Europe among us, among member states?
I'm actually very sympathetic to the progress made by the outgoing Commission on the digital single market, but we're not there yet, and we are still well now 28, soon 27 countries that need to work together in order to get a common and level playing field for data sharing. I think the PSI directive that was adopted formally, was adopted formally last week by the Council, is an important step. I think also we need to see, to bring this forward. Public sectors usually known for having very good quality data, that can be used and reused by the private sector for building new products and services. That should be brought forward. I think one of the things that is important in my point of view is also that we also need to ensure that the digital competition in Europe is based on a fair approach to competition rules. Just a few remarks to what you said, Ms. Mocan. The issue of transformation, I fully agree, has nothing or very little to do with technology. What I can see from the Danish experiences is that we have actually embedded it into public sector reforms, meaning that and in Denmark, many of the public sector reforms are driven by the Ministry of Finance. From a very simple logic, we need to save money. But if you want to save money using digital, you also need to have quality behind the digital services. If you can't get your population using the digital services, you will not be able to reach the cost savings that you want in public budgets. But that said, I think what we can do in Europe, and I know that we have been working on it for many years. It's not something that has just come around now. It has been an issue worked upon by member states since the 1990s of getting a more seamless and coherent public sector in order to support the intention and the goals of the single market. So that is the starting point. That is also the vision behind what we are trying to do in the public sector in order to have cross-border coherency.
Thank you.